we go. Cindi Myers, L.R. Braden, and Sue Hinkin, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast and to today's panel of our Writer of the Year finalists for 2021. It's great to have you all here today. And the dog.
Sorry.
That's okay. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. Let's just go around the horn real quick and maybe we'll go in reverse alphabetical order, starting with Cindi Myers, and just introduce yourself to us. Just give us an idea of what you write, how long you've been writing, and, can you give us a flavor?
All right. Well, I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old, and I read all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And I thought telling stories for a living must be just the greatest thing in the world. So I started writing little stories, and I finally sold my first novel in 1999. And I've written about 100 books since then. I write all kinds of romance. I've written romantic comedy, women's fiction, erotic romance. Right now, I primarily write romantic suspense for Harlequin. And I've also, before I sold novels, I worked as a magazine writer. I worked for a newspaper. I've done advertising writing. I think I've done pretty much every kind of writing there is. And I just am so happy to get to do this for a living.
That's great. Sue, you're next. Sue Hinkin.
Yes, hi. Like Cindi, I started writing very early. Nancy Drew books, however. When I was really little, I would write and illustrate Nancy Drew books for myself. But I never really saw myself as a writer until much later in my life, even though all along I was been involved in writing. I was a photographer. I worked in television news as a cinematographer. I'm an AFI, American Film Institute grad in cinematography, and then did a lot of work in higher education, working with students in career development at Savannah College of Art and Design and similar types of places. And I sold my first book, I think, in 2017. My first novel came out in 2018, and I'm just finishing, just turned in number 5 in a thriller series that I do.
Great, terrific.
That's a quick overview.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more detail for sure. LR, give us a sense of what you write.
Well, I write speculative fiction. Feel like a bit of a newbie over here because I actually haven't been writing for very long. Always been a reader, read just everything I could ever get my hands on as a kid, and I gravitated towards fantasy and science fiction. I have an English literature degree along with my studio art degree. So again, just all reading. I never took any writing classes. It was all reading. And then about 8 years ago, I was, again, reading a book. I was just sitting there at my kitchen table reading a book, and I went, I bet I could do this. So I did. I sat down and I planned out a story and started writing. And my first book was published not quite 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago this summer. And I actually just last week published my 5th book in the same series. So it's a urban fantasy series called The Magicsmith.
The Magicsmith. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, one obvious question for me is, what does it mean to each of you to be named a finalist for the Writer of the Year for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers? And maybe we'll go in reverse order. So LR, back to you.
For me, it's kind of validation, external validation, I guess. Like I said, I'm still pretty new at this. I just sort of sat down one day and went, hey, I'm going to try to write a story and we'll see if anybody wants to read it. And people have, and the response I've gotten has been amazing. And like being nominated for this, it really helps me believe that this is something I could do. This is a career I can have.
Yeah, absolutely. Sue?
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming in a lot of ways. I feel very honored by the nomination. I owe a great deal to Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, and I really cut my teeth as a writer at the level that I wanted to write at via my Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Critique Group, which I joined in the winter of 2014. So to be recognized is a real thrill.
Cindi.
I think nominating writers for Writer of the Year is something really wonderful that Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers does. As LR said, it's very validating. Writing is kind of a lonely profession and you don't get a lot of feedback all the time. So I think it's really a great honor to be nominated and recognized by your peers.
Yeah. Cindi, you live out on the Western Slope. Do you feel involved? I know there's a Grand Junction base for the Western Slope kind of chapter of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. Do you feel involved in RMFW out there?
I still do, just because I have so many friends that are in RMFW. It's probably not as intensely involved as I was when I lived on the Western Slope and went to the monthly meetings and things like that. But fortunately, the online world allows us to communicate with people and other writers. Yeah. And I'm still good friends with a lot of RMFW members.
Right. And you previously, Cindi, were named Writer of the Year, 2005, I think you told me. What did that mean or do for you? Was it, can you talk about what you thought at the time and bring yourself back to that point? I assume that at 2005, you'd probably only written maybe your first 30 or 40 books at that point. So,
when I joined RMFW back in 2001, my ambition was to be named Writer of the Year one day because I just thought it was such a cool thing. And when I actually won, I have to say my first thought was, I'm going to have to give a speech at conference, which is like, ah. Yeah. But, it was really a wonderful experience. You felt like you were recognized and you got to wear that honor all year. And I thought it was really great.
Yeah. Sue, it sounds like you remember your first engagement with RMFW through a critique group, but I'm going to ask LR and Cindi as well about their first engagement. LR, do you remember your first, what drew you to RMFW and what was the first sort of point of contact?
Well, the very first point of contact I had was actually a workshop that RMFW was offering that I went to. And it was the first time I had ever interacted with other writers at all. And I remember I was sitting at a table with Jason Evans, and he was so friendly and so outgoing, and he was recommending that I find a critique group and that I sign up for all these things, and he had so much advice to give me.
Yep.
I remember thinking it was a very friendly and engaging group, and it was so welcoming.
Yep. Do you remember the topic of that first workshop by any chance?
It was let's see. It was something along the lines of how to avoid being buried in the slush pile for writing query letters.
Yeah.
We've all taken that one.
Yeah. Cindi, do you remember your first engagement with RMFW?
I attended a Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Colorado Gold Conference in 2000, the fall of 2000. I had moved to Colorado from Texas the year before. And in Texas, I was a member of the Austin Writers League. And I really liked, as a romance writer, I really liked being a part of a group that was lots of different types of writers. I thought that was very energizing. Mm-hmm. And though I belonged to romance writers groups, when I heard that there was a group, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, I thought, oh, what a great opportunity to meet a lot of other writers who write different things. And so I came to the conference and everyone was so friendly and welcoming. And it was just, all the workshops were so excellent. And I thought, this is a group that I really want to be a part of.
And in 2000, you had already been published, I assume. Yeah.
I sold my first book in 1999. So my first book came out in 2000.
Okay. So you were just really, at that point,
pretty new.
Pretty much breaking in. That's great. So I'd like to ask each of you, just putting RMFW aside for a minute, just talking about writing in general. You know, I'd like each of you to sort of pass along a couple of tips or, you know, just very overarching thoughts about writing. If somebody's out there listening to this podcast and saying, oh, here's 3 finalists for Writer of the Year, they must know something that I don't know, because I have yet to get an agent, let alone be published, or I have yet to finish a book that I want to independently publish, anything. But I really need to unlock a few secrets about the whole writing process. Maybe starting with LR, just what, as you sit down to write, what are the things you tell yourself? They're little reminders to keep going and pushing through, or anything about the process.
Well, one of the first things that I remind myself when I sit down to write is my overarching story. I am a plotter pantser. So I have a loose outline of my story that I write that keeps me on track. And then I sit down and I go, okay, today, this is where we're starting and this is where we need to end up. What happens in between, you know, I don't always know, but I have a rough outline of where I'm going to try to get to. And I think having those short-term goals, not the long-term goal of, okay, I'm going to write this book, because that's really overwhelming if you sit down and you're like, I'm going to write this book today. So if you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to write this scene, I just have to get my character from point A to point B, and hopefully some fun stuff happens in there. And for me, that makes my daily writing much more manageable, and I get to actually achieve goals and give myself a little pat on the back. And I think that really helps me both stay on track and stay motivated.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask each of you the same follow-up question. LR, this is the question. What is your biggest challenge about the daily writing process? Is it dialogue? Is it action scenes? Is it just actually getting to the time to sit down? Is it big ideas, good ideas? What? I
would say I have 2 major challenges. The biggest major challenge that I have for getting my writing done is probably I like to spend time with my family. I have a small daughter and I like to be with her whenever she's not at school. So basically from when I drop her off at school to when I pick her up from school is my writing window. And with summer vacation fast approaching, that is a big challenge for me. As far as my actual writing, I would say when I'm opening a new scene is probably my biggest sticking point. Like dialogue, action, I've never had any problem. Just I sit down and the words flow. But when I'm opening a brand new scene and I have to describe it and I have to make sure that the reader is anchored and they know who's there, you know, what's the season? Are we in a city? Are we in the country? Is it cold? Is it all of those details that need to be wrapped in there without making an info dump that bores the readers to death? I'd say that's probably my biggest challenge.
Yeah. Good. Sue, how about some tips to start with from you? What have you learned along the way?
Well, I think for me, the 3 most important things that you need to have, that you need to do if you want to be successful in this crazy serendipitous kind of business is, I think you got to have passion for it. And I remember when I saw Shannon Baker speak for the first time when she was Writer of the Year, how she talked about how she quit and she had given up, but then she was back. And passion is something that sustains you. You can walk away, but if you're passionate about it, you're going to come back. And practice, you got to sit down and do it. And then I think persistence times 10. I mean, persistence is just absolutely everything. So those are kind of the 3 big things. In terms of my writing right now, initially I was POV challenged. I think I've kind of got that together. Now I think I've got some pacing issues. So that's something real specific that I'm working on. Time, you know, life interferes. Life has its own agenda, and you just have to continue to work with that. Right. My daughter just had twins, so I'm like on grandma duty. which is exhausting. So I don't, a lot of time I'd spent writing, I'm doing that for now. But that's, you know, that's a piece of life that's so important, and I don't want to walk away from that. And I've had some health issues this year, which have been really challenging in terms of working with screens. But all of that, throughout that passion, the persistence, and the, you know, continuing to practice the writing.
Yep. Just to drill down a little bit, and I don't want to leave our listeners in the dust of POV. They may not know the lingo, point of view. What was the specific challenge you had with point of view, and how did you solve it? Because that can be a common problem.
Yeah, I think I was a head hopper, which means that you start out in maybe the point of view of your heroine or your protagonist, and 2 paragraphs later, you're into your antagonist, and then you're into a secondary character, and then you're, you know, I kind of was very stream of consciousness. I wrote in a very stream of conscious type of way, and my critique group really kicked butt on that one, and I think I learned a great deal from them. They wouldn't let me let up, and in a very kind way, they taught me an awful lot in the point of view area.
Good enough. Sid, thank you for that. Thank you. Cindi, how about you? 100 books in, is it, I mean, I kind of feel like maybe you just can fall out of bed and write a book. It's not a problem.
No. Every book is different.
Yeah.
Every book has its own challenges.
Yeah.
I think if I was going to give advice to someone, I would say to have a little faith in yourself. You've probably read a great many stories by the time you sit down to write one, and you've absorbed all of that. You know what makes a good story, even if you can't put it into words. So when you sit down to write, give yourself permission to experiment, to play. Don't worry about the final product so much. Just get some words on paper and try not to edit yourself too much. LR gave some really good advice about breaking it down into little chunks. Don't think I'm going to sit down and write a whole book, because that is truly daunting. I'm just going to write this one scene today, or I'm just going to write an introduction, or maybe I'm just going to write a character sketch to get to know my characters better. I think you learn by doing. So the more you write, the better you have a feel for your story and your characters, and you can always go back and edit things later. I think it's just really important to get those words down on paper and find your voice and learn about your story and trust yourself a little bit.
Yeah. What are your biggest challenges, Cindi?
There's always a point in the middle of every book where I'm just thinking it's terrible, and why did I ever start this story, and where are these people going? And I know now that I'm going to hit that wall at some point, and to just keep pushing through it and keep writing. And by the time I get to the end and go back and read my draft, it'll be like, well, this isn't so bad after all. I think it's just my personality to, in the middle of it, think, oh, this isn't any good. I've made a mistake.
Yeah. Hey, I want to go back to something Sue said about passion, and you've all kind of touched on it. Is passion something you can teach, or is passion something you can go out and acquire as an individual? I think that is sort of a make or break kind of thing for a lot of folks. I think we've all know people who've been in the writing business for a while and given up, stepped aside, realized the challenges, and just have decided to not follow through. And I think we probably all know writers who have been in it a long, long time, who have just they've finished many, many books, have never been able to sell one, and through the traditional routes at least. And I'm just wondering, how did each of you, did the passion, it sounds like in all of your cases, maybe the passion came naturally, but then you had to apply the passion to the work. I guess I just want to hear a little bit more, maybe starting with LR, just, do you find that passion is something that you can just turn to and open up the tap when you need it and let it flow?
Well, for me, I've always been the kind of person who needs a creative outlet, and it hasn't always been writing. Like I said, I also have a studio art degree. So I have always been, you know, doodling, drawing, chain mailing, knitting.
By any chance, do you make jewelry? Is that jewelry behind you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So yeah, I actually, that's my side business. I have a Etsy store where I make and sell chainmail jewelry. Actually, even while we're talking, I'm sitting here fiddling with rings. I'm the kind of person who always has to have my hands busy.
Yeah. Okay, how do we find you on Etsy real quick? Just we can drop in a free commercial right now. So
so it would be etsy.com. My shop is called Whimsy Design, spelled WIMSI. Yeah, so just shop.whimsy.com.
Okay, back to writing. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But yeah, so I've always needed creative outlets like that. And so I found that for me, at least, if I don't have something that I'm funneling that energy into, whether it be chainmail or drawings or writing, I tend to get really depressed. So for me, writing is, it's like a health activity for me. Kind of helps keep me sane.
Yeah. So that's something you need. You need this. Yeah. You have no problem with passion or finding it. And
no, so it's a tricky question for me, because yeah, I'm like, well, I do what I do because I want to do it. I can't imagine writing if I didn't have that drive. So it would be very difficult. And at the same time, I have known a lot of people who, both in writing and in art, who have had the passion but lacked the skill. And that at least you can handle, right? Because you can take classes, you can get the craft, you can work on the skills. But I think without that passion, that driving force behind it, I think it's easy for people to give up, because all of these things are very difficult to reach the end of, to actually hit that point where you feel like you've become successful. And I think the passion is what gets people there.
Cindi, any 100 books in, or did you have any years or moments where things were not so good and you were thinking about doing something else, or any low points? I'm just sort of wondering if you had to press through at any point.
It took me 10 years to sell my first book. I wrote 10 complete manuscripts before I sold the first one.
Wow.
So, and I thought about giving up many times.
Yeah.
Through there, but I couldn't give up. I put it aside, and then the next thing you know, I've got a new story idea that I was getting excited about and wanted to write. And life happens, and you know, things happen in your life that make you turn away from it. But I pretty much always have deadlines now. And so if you know that there's a deadline that you have to meet, then it makes you sit down and really start to focus on the story. And sometimes the writing is like therapy. You know, it takes you outside of whatever it is in real life that is bothering you. And so it's a retreat. It's something that you can do. I do know a lot of people who give up just because the business is really hard and their focus is on selling, because that's a validation, you know, of being published. But before I was published, whenever I got into that frame of mind, I always tried to focus on the storytelling and what writing that story was doing for me outside of publication. It was feeding something in me that I really needed.
That's great. Sue, is passion something you can go out and acquire if you don't have it?
I don't.
You know, I think you can discover passions throughout your life. You know, when that you didn't know, opportunities that you didn't know about, that things that didn't exist in your mind. So I think you can discover them, but I think that passion, once discovered, is very, very much an intrinsic type of thing. can relate to what Cindi was saying in terms of story. I think story is my passion, and it has manifested itself in different ways throughout my life. I was a photographer. I've been a cinematographer doing creative types of work, documentaries. I got into the area of helping students in their development, and the thing I was interested in was their stories and how their story was going to unfold. So writing is the great combination of storytelling and visual arts, and my writing is very visual. When I write a scene, I see the scene like I'm seeing a movie, and I write down what I see. And so for me, being a writer really has combined all those different interests in storytelling into one. And I think it's taken me this long because I think you learn so much throughout your life that I'm finally at a point where I have stuff to tell, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but it's from the heart. I mean, it's part of your DNA, or it's not, I think.
Very good. I'm wondering what each of your goals are at this point, and I'm wondering, what you see in the next few years for each of you. And I'm particularly wondering if any of you are thinking about writing something other than the kind of book you've been writing up to this point. In other words, experimenting a little bit and maybe writing horror, or maybe straight up literature or something like that. So maybe starting with Cindi this time. Just what do you see in the next few years for you?
I've written women's fiction in the past, and I would like to do that again.
Okay, so that's off the list then. That's off the list.
Yeah,
what else would you?
Romantic suspense. I've thought about doing maybe a romantic thriller. So that might be in the future, playing around with some ideas.
Would that be you? Obviously, I don't think I know the answer to this. So would you be scared by trying something new? The answer with you is no, of course.
I think to stay in this business a long time, you have to constantly reinvent yourself. Because I started out writing historical romance, and when that died for me, then I started writing contemporary comedy, and then I moved on to romantic suspense. I think it's constantly reinventing yourself if you're going to stay viable over the long haul.
Right. LR?
So I absolutely want to branch out and write more stories. There are so many amazing types of books out there. And I probably will always have an element of speculative fiction in mind just because I love it. But even now, with the publication of book 5 in my series, I asked the publisher if I could do a spin-off that's in the same universe, but I wanted to play with different narrative styles, and I wanted to add different elements. I wanted to make it more of a mystery. I wanted to add more romance to it. I wanted to kind of stretch those skills and experiment some and see what I could do. I've also played with writing some young adult novels and straight up science fiction novel. So I absolutely am at a stage where I'm just playing with things and seeing what I like to write and how it turns out.
Yeah. Very good. Sue, what's ahead for you, do you think?
Yeah, I'm working on 2 things that are different than thrillers right now, although like Lauren said, there are definitely elements of thrillers and everything I'll probably be writing. But the first one is I'm calling 66, and it's a coming of age as a young woman in the 1960s, 1970s. And the sexual revolution as kind of an underpinning of that. And then I'm writing, and I want to do this self-published. I want that experience. But I'm writing a very contemporary kind of a murder she wrote, only it's a woman who's a television crime writer and living in Venice, California.
All right. Very good. What you said you wanted the experience of being self-published. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Talk about that. Why?
Yeah, I think it's such a, only like 5 years ago, it seems like it was kind of, you don't self-publish. It's kind of an opt-out kind of thing to do. And it now just seems so exciting. And so many of my colleagues are doing really well financially, self-publishing. And I want to be part of that. I want to have that experience and see what it's like to be in control, quote unquote, of all aspects of a series or a book that you're working on.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. There are so many questions I have to ask, and we've been mostly talking about inside sort of the writing experience, but I want to ask one question about everything that happens after you're done, which is finding readers and marketing a little bit, and especially in this day with a pandemic, with all the bookstores shut down, at least until recently, what that's looked like. So I want to ask one last question, just a round robin, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But my question is on marketing, you know, what are some of the ideas or secrets or tips, suggestions you have about finding your audience? And, you know, that is one struggle, no matter whether you're self-published or traditionally published. Even the traditionally published writers are really left with their own marketing devices. You may get some help from the publisher, but it's not as much as it was. You're not flying around the country and getting picked up at the airport in Cadillacs to go to your events with 1,000 people waiting for you. Sue, what have you found with marketing? Anything you can pass along?
I wish I had something to pass along. I feel like I've tried an awful lot of various things. As an independently, you know, even though I'm traditionally published, even if you're traditionally published with one of the top publishing houses, you still have, ultimately, it's your responsibility these days to do the marketing. I think I've had the most luck with some contests and the kind of publicity you can get if you do well in the particular contest. That's been helpful. Really doing your homework in organizations that give reviews, and go to several of those. Sometimes some of them are inexpensive, some of them are very expensive. So I think you've got to have a budget for your marketing. I'm not going to be spending my time writing blogs and newsletters. I know that's something that a lot of people do, but that's not how I want to spend my writing time. That's a chore for me. So I don't have any kind of silver bullet to pass along. You know, if you hear anything, let me know. So go to the next person.
No, do you do advertisements on Amazon or Facebook? Do you put an ad budget together, anything like that?
I have done advertising on both of those, not to great success.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I spend most of my money in a couple organizations that I know do a good job of reviewing books.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing I do are like I entered the Forward Indie contest this year and was a finalist, and they do a lot of advertising. So I'm getting some draw through that. But those are kind of two things that have worked for me. Everything else that I've tried has been very mediocre.
Challenging, yeah.
Yeah.
LR?
Well, again, I haven't been doing this for a super long time, so I'm kind of still in the learning stages. I try to spend some time every week looking up articles and other people's advice of what to handle. I did make myself a marketing budget. I said I could take 10% of everything I earned off my books and put it towards my next 6 months of marketing. That's how I'm doing it, so that I kind of, hopefully I'm keeping that even and not spending more than I'm making. But some of the things I've tried, I've done giveaways, I've done Facebook ads, I've done BookBub ads. I have like every social media I could think of to make an account on that I post things on. And I'm not really a social media person, so that one is a challenge for me, but I'm trying because it seems like a good way to reach people. I think overall, as far as sales return, the best return I've gotten has been, I did get a BookBub feature deal. and that one helped a lot. It definitely was worth the money for the return that I got in readership. I would also say my publisher, they put my book on NetGalley to get early reviews. And some of those NetGalley reviewers, every time one of my books comes out, they get it early, they review it quickly, and they have become very consistent readers of mine. And so I would say that NetGalley has also paid off as far as just spreading the word for my readership.
That's great. And just real quickly, without going into a whole lot of detail, the BookBub promotion, that ad, can you give us a rough idea what it costs? And you just apply and just...
Yeah, so you apply for it usually like somewhere between 1 and 3 months ahead of time before you're going to put a book on discount. When you do it, some people pick specific dates, like, oh, my book is releasing this day. If you want a better chance at actually landing the deal, give them flexible dates, let them choose, and then work your discount around them. It's worth it. It costs, I want to say like $300 something is what it cost me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely was a good return.
Yeah. Very good. Cindi, do you have to do much personal marketing, or does your publishers pretty much handle that for you?
Harlequin does a really good job of marketing.
Yeah.
They have huge distribution. They have a terrific online presence. The only thing I would say I do is I have a very small street team that I send copies of the book and they post reviews for me. And it's literally just about 4 people. It's not a huge bunch or anything.
Yeah.
But that's really all I do, because Harlequin really does a great job. Over the years, I have done pretty much everything you could think of, and I'm very cynical that any of it does anything. So
it's amazing. You can, like I always say, there's no shortage of good. You could spend 24 hours a day trying to do something to get the word out about your book. There's no everything you do could be a good thing to help get the word out about your work.
I will say, I think being productive and putting out a lot of books helps.
Yeah.
As it kind of helps you build.
Yeah. That's great. Well, guys, this has been great. And unfortunately, we have to end at some point, and I could talk all day, but the last thing we'd like to do is just go around and get a recommendation for another writer out there that you think more people should be reading, and just sort of pay it forward. So I'll start with Sue.
Yeah, I just finished a couple books. David Whedon's Winter Counts, which is up for a Colorado Book Award. Native American writer in the genre of, I guess, Mark Stevens and C.J. Box and others who write kind of Western types of fiction. He did a terrific job. I think he got the Agatha for best first novel. It's a very mature, well-written, really excellent book. And I'm reading Colson Whitehead, just finishing Underground Railroad.
Oh boy.
Which is an amazing book. I saw the first episode of the TV show and was totally unimpressed compared to the book, but really enjoyed the book.
Yeah. I hear that first episode is really hard to watch too.
It is.
Yeah. LR.
Well, one of my very favorite authors, who doesn't really need me touting his books, but Brandon Sanderson. I think his ability to develop unique magical systems is just mind-blowing, and he has written books, like epic fantasy books that my husband and I both really enjoy. He's written children's books that my daughter enjoys, and like, he really has quite a scope. So I'm always impressed every time I pick up one of his books at the themes and the world building and the characters. So he would be my recommendation for a speculative fiction author.
Great. Again, it's Brandon Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson.
Okay, great. And Cindi.
One of my favorite authors who I don't think gets enough enough recognition in romance is Carla Kelly. I've learned so much about writing characters from her. She writes historical romance and just beautifully written books. And everyone I know who reads her is a huge fan, but you never hear about her. So I'm always wanting to recommend her.
Carla with a K or Carla with a C?
Carla with a C.
Carla Kelly. Excellent. Well, Cindi Myers, L.R. Braden, Sue Hinkin, congratulations again on being a Writer of the Year finalists. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing some thoughts with us about your careers. And best of luck to you as the process goes forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.